seen that women have always been a part of science and astronomy. They have also always been discriminated against. They have not had access to the same level of education, the same equipment. They have not always been credited. We think many, many of them must be lost to history. However, the fact that we know about some of these women is thanks to the hard work of historians, librarians, and curators. They've managed to keep these stories with us over hundreds of years so that we tonight can be celebrating these women. So right now, there are more women proportionally in science fields in countries with less equality. This is possibly because they can pay women less and the work has been devalued. In most other countries in the world, women are massively underrepresented. So when I started my PhD in 2011, about half the schools had no girls going to study A-level physics after the age of 16. Girls made up about 20% overall of the people studying A-level physics. This is a number that's not really changed since the 80s. It's now 22% this year. That is about 4 boys for every girl. And if we keep going at this rate, it will be about 100 years before we have equal amounts. Now at this point, people sometimes wonder, so what? Women can go to university now. More women go to university than men. There are laws in place to protect women against discrimination. So if women are just freely choosing not to do science, then we should respect their opinion. People do say that, but I think that's true, but the emphasis there is on the word if they are freely choosing. So if you ask girls why they don't want to go on to study A-level physics, they say it's because they think it will be too hard for them. So if you look at girls that have the highest science grade, they think that A-level science would be too hard for them. And we can't ask for more. These are the highest educated people at that age in our country. So if you get a boy and a girl with equal ability, they will both agree that the boy is better. This is something, this is related to something that we call unconscious bias. Now, there have been study after study after study that shows that everybody, people of all genders, have a bias against girls and women in science, and this is people that aren't aware of it, that aren't doing it on purpose. So an example of just one study here to emphasize the point. They gave identical applications to a number of people for jobs in academic fields, academic science fields. The names were randomized. Yet for some reason, everyone, people of all genders, rated the male as more competent. They offered him a higher starting salary and more mentoring. So it's not massively surprising that girls have self-esteem issues here. And I think unconscious bias, when the people told these results, they were shocked, they were surprised, they didn't know about it. They weren't doing it on purpose, they didn't think they were doing it. And we think this comes from, so when you type something into Google, it starts to correct you, it thinks it knows what you want. This is what our brains do. So if every time we see a male scientist, every time we think scientist, we see a male, older white male scientist, our brains are going to just keep autocorrecting. So that's what we're going to think whether we're aware of it or not. And that's pretty much what's happening. So I think a really important way of dealing with this is by talking about the sort of women that I've talked about tonight and showing that our brain was doing is probably wrong. Like, when you think of a scientist, you should be thinking of these people. So there's the issue of role models, real life women, so we can highlight, and there's the issue of media representation. So before I get onto that, I'm going to talk a little bit more about problems that girls and women have in science. So first of all, finally, the other thing that girls say is they don't want to be the only girl in the classroom, and they don't want to put up with the boys' behaviour in this environment. So, those two things are obviously linked, but if you take the first thing, girls don't want to be the only girl in the classroom. You imagine if you're the only girl in the classroom and you mess something up. People are going to, there's already a stereotype. People are going to think, well, girls are bad at math, If one boy out of 29 boys messes it up, they're not under that pressure. People aren't going to think, well, that's because it's a man. So there is a lot of pressure there. The boys' behaviour thing is something I think we'll come on to in a minute. Before that, I've got 2 other videos from NASA NASA. This next one is my favourite, and these are about someone from NASA asked them about what it was like working as a woman. This was filmed in the 80s. This first video, Shelley Glover, she talks about studying in Texas for her degree in engineering in the 60s. And I think this is pretty remarkable.
I've worked on the shuttle program since I've been working here at NASA over the 5.5, if you count the contract time, 6.5 years that I've worked here. And it's very fascinating, especially when you watch the shuttle and that orbiter just glides in and lands on target. You get goosebumps knowing that you were an active part in making history happen. Graduated from a high school that had a senior class of about 38 people, and it's a central Texas town of about 2,000 people. So if you were considering a profession, you either had the doctor who was a role model, or you had the school teachers who were role models. And I was afraid of the sight of blood, and teachers didn't make enough money. My oldest brother was in his sophomore year in college, majoring in civil engineering when I graduated from high school. So about that time, he asked me, well, what are you going to do? I said, well, I imagine I'll go to college. He said, well, what are you going to major in? I said, I don't know, maybe engineering. He said, well, forget it. He said, I'm a fellow, and engineering is rough for me. He said, I don't think you can make it in engineering. And I said, well, I think I can. He said, anyway, which one are you going to major in? And I said, well, how many kinds do they have? And he said, well, that's civil engineering, architectural, mechanical, and electrical. And I said, which one's the hardest? And he said, electrical engineering. So I said, okay, I'm majoring in electrical engineering. And I graduated in May of 1971 with a degree in electrical engineering.
Wow. So the next one is Susan Orman. She's just been asked by the interviewer if she faced any special problems being a woman.
Any special problems? I think the answer is yes. I mean, if you're going to be honest, you have to say yes. There are just not that many women in the professional or scientific field. So you find yourself being a minority in the midst of, in a sense, not a minority. Women aren't half the population. But when I first came to Ames, there was one other woman in my group of about 30 men, and no minorities. The present group I'm in, as you can see, there are a lot of women, and just having the opportunity to talk with other women and share experiences, at least for me, has been really helpful and kind of fun too.
So I think we can see that a lot of the problems that girls face don't go away as you get older. And women are more likely to leave the profession at all points on the career ladder than men. This is known as the leaky pipeline. So you think, well, we're going to try and usher all these girls into A-level physics, but if we're losing them 3 years later because of other problems, what is the point? This needs to be addressed on every level. So there's sort of more passive discrimination and more active. So the unconscious bias is obviously more passive. And I think this is as well the fact that this part of it is as well the fact that the academic system is just badly designed. So if you want to get a career in academia, the system is designed for a world where of a couple, one person, the man, worked full-time, one person, the woman, didn't work. And so the system is really bad for people who work part-time, that have time off, but even for people who have a partner that works. So academia usually begins with a few short-term positions at different universities. So you can travel from town to town, even from country to country, every few years for sort of the first 10, 15 years of your career. So at this point, a lot of people want to settle down, have a family, get a mortgage, And when this sort of thing happens, if your partner works, your partner's job might be prioritized. If their job isn't in academia, then it will probably offer more stability. If your partner's male, they're probably going to be paid more. Another problem with this is that people are mainly judged on their most recent recent academic record, which doesn't have as much relevance anymore as it used to. It doesn't take into account the fact that people have time off and work part-time and so on. So again, people of all genders want to change, have expressed a desire to change the system, but it is going to be difficult. So partly tradition, people just don't like change. The other thing is that the field is competitive. Some people benefit from the system, and they are more likely to be in positions of power. So while that is somewhat more passive, excuse me, some discrimination is much more active. So I think everyone's probably aware now of the Me Too movement, which became popular again last year in Hollywood. I don't know if people are as aware that there's been similar movements in basically every other industry, including astronomy. So some of the people that are trying to fight sexual harassment is the 1752 group, and a spokesperson for this group is Emma Chapman. So a problem that they have noticed is that in academia, an abuser will often go back to work. Everybody will have signed a non-disclosure agreement, so nobody can talk about what happened, nobody can prevent it from happening again and again. Emma Chapman is doing a lot of good work in this area, but again, this is not something I want to dwell on too much. I want to say though that gender diversity, as well as making the world better, safer for women and girls, is better for everyone. There are so many examples of how using Mao as the default model has turned out to be wrong. And it's been a huge waste of time and money, but it can be highly dangerous. So one example I'll use is crash test dummies. So female crash test dummies weren't mandatory in car safety regulations until 2011. And women right now, if there's a car crash, women are more likely to be injured because of this. So I also want to very briefly discuss the effect that this will have on boys and men. So I want to first start by saying that more girls and women doesn't necessarily mean less boys and men. There's a shortage of engineers in the UK, and it's thought that the women's participation in this field could be worth about $2 billion to the UK economy. However, I think a lot of the reason why girls don't want to get into physics, a lot of the reason why this unconscious bias exists in the first place is due to stereotypes. So women are generally stereotyped to be better at things that involve emotions and caring for others. Men are generally stereotyped to be better at things that involve physical strength and logic. Now these stereotypes, they are bad for everybody. So I'll just give one very quick example. They are really bad for men. Men have less emotional outlets that are acceptable by society, and I think, it's World Mental Health Day today, and I think it's worth pointing out that the highest cause of death for men under 50 is suicide. And so I think it's very important that as we get more girls and women into these sort of STEM fields, we also want more boys in fields where they're underrepresented too. So if we can possibly all agree that it's a good idea to challenge these stereotypes, the next thing we need to think about is intersectionality.